spent part of my week researching copyright law. Now, my friend is an attorney, so I called her to ask about my research. And this is the scenario that I described. If you submit your intellectual property to a third-party distributor with a copyright mark, and they are the ones who remove the copyright mark by mistake, would you still be able to assert a claim in the court of law? Is it still your work, even though the distributor didn't name it as such? My lawyer friend said that the claim was unlikely to succeed. It's probable that the work would become public domain, and the creator's only recourse would be against the company that distributed it. But depending on the success of the work, the settlement could be far less than the worth of the product, thereby leaving the creator out of luck. Such was the fortune of George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. His distributor left off the copyright mark from the film, which was a shame, at least for Romero, because the cultural sensation not only would have raked in millions for the artist, but it ended up spawning an entire genre, one that is still undead and kicking today. The birth of the modern zombie film. Now, before Romero, the zombie genre was relatively obscure. The idea was an import from Africa, actually. The word zombie comes from two words, the Congo word for god or fetish, and the Banda word for corpse. In the New World, specifically in Haiti, the two were combined to create a terrifying legend of the reanimated corpse. This early version of the zombie featured a sorcerer who revived the corpse and controlled it like a puppet. It was done with a combination of drugs given to a living person, drugs that would induce a false death. The death-like state was so convincing that the person's loved ones would host their funeral and then bury them. And then days later, or nights later, the sorcerer would dig up the person, and then they would use a spell to bring the person back to life. However, the drugs would have made them brainless at this point, a servile thing to do their master's bidding. Stories included ones where the zombies become something of a patsy, going forth in the night to murder enemies. Now, the social theorist, Marina Warner, offers a smart description of what is happening here. She calls this imperial Gothic, which refers to the exchange that a colonizing culture has with a native host culture. The colonizer appropriates the stories and elements of the host culture and then turns them and weaponizes them against the host culture and the native population. In other words, the zombie becomes a racist fantasy used to exoticize and ultimately dehumanize the host culture and the native peoples. But as much as this is a part of the zombie story, the zombie genre has been known to critique racist dynamics. This includes George Romero's landmark film. In it, a black protagonist attempts survival against a largely white horde of the undead. Unfortunately for the main character, it doesn't end well, but with a twist. He escapes the zombies only to be caught by a group of white racists who then murder him. The film is actually a commentary on the tragic inescapability of racism, thereby critiquing rather than reinforcing racist expectations. It was a shock to viewers in that time who were unused to seeing a black protagonist in not only horror films, but in any films. Romero's 1978 film changed the zombie legend in other ways, specifically detaching the undead from the workings of a sorcerer. The new genre was more kind of sci-fi scientific, sometimes playing on fears of the Cold War. Here, the detonation of a nuclear bomb created the zombie hordes. Or more commonly, it was caused by a viral outbreak that spread rapidly with a bite. The zombies here were ravenous, seeking to gnaw at any human that was in sight. The other big difference is that the Romero-inspired zombies were never solitary. They were legion. They were members of a horde, a pack, sometimes an ocean of the undead. The only humans left were the survivalists with tons of weapons and diminishing ranks. If I had to lay money on it, this is the reason the zombie genre resonated. It's the idea of the brainless horde. Zombie films are often commentaries on groupthink and ideological indoctrination. It's the terrifying prospect of a horde that cannot be persuaded with reason and is only motivated by its base instincts, a mob that easily infects others to swell its ranks. Sound familiar? This is probably why the genre exploded in the early 2000s. It was catalyzed by tensions around 9/11. Stephen King summarized the cultural fears well. He writes, by 2004, only 3 years downriver from 9/11, a remake of Dawn of the Living Dead was made. And what haunted our nightmares at that time was the idea of suicide bombers driven by an unforgiving and unthinking ideology and religious fervor. They would keep coming and coming until we were dead or they were. You can't debate them, you can't parlay with them. All you can do is shoot them and then steer clear of the twitchers. In other words, zombies crystallized American fears of terrorism and reinforced prejudices against Arab countries. But the zombie genre in that moment was not only a regurgitation of the cultural fears of outsiders. For many, the zombie genre resonated as a critique of those very fears and the irrational response that America was having to them. In the anxious years, right after 9/11, there was a brainless consensus across political parties that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and was ultimately behind 9/11. Any questioning of those unfounded claims meant you were a terrorist sympathizer. Spoiler alert, Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction, and it was not behind 9/11. But that didn't stop the bipartisan zombie horde from attacking anyone who didn't get on board with their claims. The zombie genre has been used to critique other moments of brainless ideological adherence. It can also be an anti-fascist genre. Shockwaves, Night of the Zombies, Zombie Lake, Overlord, and Dead Snow are all films about Nazi zombies. These films point out the ways people lose all sense of individuality and become unthinking puppets under fascism. It's the Antifa zombie, the use of the film to critique and combat fascism. And then there's also the pacifist zombie. This genre was frequently invoked to combat violence and war in times of political strife. The best example here is, and we heard it just a moment ago, the Cranberries' 1994 hit Zombie, right, which criticized the ongoing violent struggles in Ireland known as the Troubles. The song was written 1 year after a fatal bombing by the IRA that killed 2 children. And here are some of the lyrics. Will and I were singing along as Catherine was playing. Another mother's breaking heart is taken over. When the violence causes silence, we must be mistaken. It's the same old theme since 1916. In your head, they're still fighting with their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their guns. In your head, they are dying. Zombie, 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 what is in your head? What is in your head, zombie? Now, a more recent staple of the zombie genre has been its critique of internet consumption. There's tons of cartoons about this with hordes of people shambling along, heads bent down, looking at their screens. Sometimes this is used as a dig at young people, but I think that's unfair, because I know lots of folks my age and up who are phone zombies, and some days I am one of those undead. And if you want to take the metaphor just a little bit further, we might say that social media causes the brain to rot just enough for people to start biting each other online. The good news is that there is actually a cure for this particular zombie virus, encapsulated in the phrase, "go touch grass." It's another way of saying, unhook from the internet and go take a walk outside. There's life happening and it is not online. Okay, here's the last zombie factoid I'm going to mention today. And it's going to take me just a little while to explain exactly how this came to be. It's a subgenre of the zombie category that features people falling in love with zombies. Yep, it's zombie romance. It's a thing. In her book, Gothica, Victoria Nelson argues that all Gothic monsters go through a 3-part transformation. In their first incarnation, they are the terrifying beasts of nightmare. They are vampires that feed on you and then cast aside your bloodless corpse. They are werewolves that rip your face off. They are cannibalistic zombies ready to take a bite. But then they go through a revision. Here they start to have more human traits. These stories are sometimes written from the perspective of the monster itself, and such inner monologue that the monster is having always gives the reader an opportunity to sympathize with parts of the monster's experience, especially when the monster feels excluded because of who they are. It then turns them into a stand-in for different kinds of discrimination and also for loneliness. People start to feel like, yeah, there's parts of that monster that, I've had that same experience. And then the last step, Victoria Nelson writes, for the Gothic monsters is that they are divinized. They're actually put above human beings. Here the monster actually becomes the unsung hero, embodying extraordinary traits of courage and self-sacrifice. Not only are the monsters not bad, but they are better than us. And this is where zombie romance fits in. The film Warm Bodies is a great example of this subgenre. Yes, the zombie is an undead person who feeds off human flesh, but come on, give him a break. He only looks scary because no one will sit down and hear him out. Once the zombie's girlfriend-to-be breaks the social taboo of speaking with the zombie, he opens up and becomes surprisingly relatable and misunderstood and funny and lonely. He becomes boyfriend material. This has got to be one of the most unhinged sermons I've ever preached. And I'm quite okay with that. But now I'm going to push it even more in the direction of the unhinged and close by saying the zombie might just be a good spiritual teacher for us. How about that? Specifically, there are 3 lessons that zombies teach us. 1, resist groupthink. Clarify your values and be willing to stand up for them. Sometimes we discover a community of like-minded people, But always remember that it is okay to disagree. Being like-minded doesn't mean that we have to go along with everything everyone is saying. Disagreement is good. It's healthy. It can be scary to do, but it's even scarier when we don't. 2, stop being a phone zombie. Just knock it off. Take a breather. Meditate, do yoga. Really do anything to give yourself a break from being online. In other words, please go touch grass. And 3, read zombie romance. Okay, so what I mean by this is that I think zombie romance is completely ridiculous. And right now, with how heavy everything feels in our worlds, I think we need every little bit of frivolity and joy that we can find. You don't have to read zombie romance, but please find the totally frivolous thing that brings you joy, and then don't stop doing it or reading it or consuming it or enjoying it, because right now we need it. I think that'll do it for today. My zombie companions, amen. Blessed be, and I love your brains.